Do your slip bobber rigs keep coming back looking like this? I get it, it's super frustrating, but in all my years of fishing, I found that there are 4 reasons why slip bobber rigs get tangled, and in this video I'm going to share with you what those 4 reasons are and how we can fix them so it never happens again. The first reason a slip bobber rig gets tangled is windy conditions. Unfortunately, the weather is completely outside of our control. However, we can mitigate the effects that the wind has on our rigs by addressing the next 3 reasons why a slip bobber rig gets tangled, which brings us to my number 2 reason: poor rig design. There are 3 things I'm going to address here: rig balance, the leader, and line memory. Now, when a rig is built correctly, there's balance all the way across the board, and you know that a rig is balanced by how it sits in the water. What you want to see when the rig hits the water is the line sliding through the bobber as the lower half of the rig is dropping to its depth, and you can tell that by what the bobber stop is doing. Now, if the bobber stop doesn't move, the rig either might be too deep, the lower half of the rig could be too light, or the rig itself is tangled up. Now, what you want for the bobber stop is to slide atop of the water until it rests on top of the bobber, which is why I really like using brightly colored stops. It's much easier to see those things on the water. Now, whenever the bobber stop is on top of the bobber, you know that the rig is as straight as an arrow. After the rig has reached its depth, the bobber should be mostly submerged in the water, which for me means about 2/3 of the bobber is below the surface. For example, the float that I'm using today, I want the water level to be somewhere here along the black. So if the bobber gets pulled under the water after I've cast it, I know that the lower half of the rig is too heavy. Now, if the bobber sits on top of the water like this, I know the lower half is too light. And in my experience, when the lower half of the rig is too light, that's where it's prone to get tangled up during casts. When you make a cast, the force generated by the rod is being channeled through the heaviest object on the rig, and if the heaviest object on the rig just so happens to be the bobber, you run the risk of getting that rig all tangled up. That's why I'm not a huge fan of these weighted bobbers that have the weights built into the bottom of them. I would much rather have the ones that come without the weights, because then I can add more weight to the lower half of the rig, and I just find it's a lot easier to find that good balance that I'm looking for if I don't have the weight built into the bobber. So before making a big cast, I recommend giving the rig a test float to make sure it works properly. Also, a really long leader could be the reason why this rig keeps getting tangled. I like my leaders to be anywhere from 1 to 2 feet. If you go any longer than that, I feel like you're just running the risk of getting this thing tangled up. A long leader is not necessary with this type of rig like it might be with other rigs. So I recommend keeping this thing from 1 to 2 feet, and also make sure this thing is free of line memory. Line memory is caused from a line being tightly coiled around the spool for long periods of time, and it can turn into a real mess if it isn't straightened out. To fix that, all you have to do is pinch and pull the line between a piece of leather until the line is straight. But even if you have a perfectly balanced rig, you have good leader length, and you have no line memory, this rig can still get tangled up on itself, which brings me to reason number 3, poor casting technique. A well-executed casting technique is extremely important in keeping this rig straight and not tangling up. Unfortunately, it's nearly impossible for me to know exactly what your casting form looks like since I'm not there with you, so let me show you how I cast this rig. I want the bobber to be roughly 6 inches off the rod tip. This will give me enough space to generate the power needed to get the rig to its target, which will be done with an overhead cast. To do that, I'll point the rod back behind me so that the rod tip is about 1 to 2 feet off the ground, where I will begin making a cast in an arching motion that both combines power and finesse. Doing this with a smooth, powerful motion will keep the leader from twirling around in the air, thus limiting the chances of it getting tangled up. But before this rig hits the water, I need to stop the line. Stopping the line will allow the energy from the cast to straighten out the rig, preventing it from getting crossed up when it hits the water. After hitting the water, the rig should reach its depth like we talked about previously. But what if you're using live bait like bluegill or some other type of bait fish? That brings me to the 4th reason why this rig gets tangled up: feisty bait fish. A standard slip bobber rig works great for live bait. In fact, it's my default approach, but I must admit that live bait can cause a mess with this rig. This happens when the main line sags below the water surface, enabling the bait to swim around the main line, causing it to tangle. Thankfully, there's a fix for that, and it comes in the form of a straw float. Now, you can buy these things online, or you can make them at home like I do, but you can see that this thing very much acts like a slip bobber as it slides up and down the line, but this thing has a very different purpose than a standard slip bobber. Instead of keeping the rig elevated in the water like a regular slip bobber, the straw float sits between the stop and the slip bobber, keeping a section of line on top of the water away from the bait so it can't swim around it. And if you want to see me put an entire straw float together, I've got a video just for that. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I will do my best to answer them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.